it's Alice, and today we are in front of my bookshelves because I'm going to be showing you a bunch of books from my shelves based on your prompts. So I asked on Instagram for your requests. I did like a show me a book that, and you could fill in the rest. And I got loads of these, so we're going to go through some of them. I really enjoy doing these kinds of videos because you guys are always really creative with what you come up with. And it's fun for me to just like try to figure out books to recommend for you. Although sometimes I do get requests that I can't think of any books for, but we're gonna do most of the ones that I could think of books for. I have narrowed it down a little bit. I've chosen the ones that are more sort of autumnal and spooky books and things like that because that's the season that we're in. And I did get a couple that I couldn't think of any books for, but that I would like recommendations for. So I'm gonna share those at the end, and maybe you guys can help out in the comments. I'm sure some of you have some books for that. But yeah, let's just get into it. The first one we're gonna do says, show me a book that has a witchy, autumnal, mysterious town vibes. And I have just the book for this. I think Payback's a Witch by Lana Harper is perfect for this because the town that it's set in, like, you can't find a more autumnal town. It is almost ridiculous how autumnal it feels in here. And the main character even points out, like, it's almost a little bit over the top, but it's like super cozy. It's set in a small town, and the main character that we're following is a witch from one of the witch families in this town, and she returns to the town after having been away for a while because there's like a tournament that she has to be a part of. I don't want to give it away, but if you want witchy vibes and autumnal small town vibes, this is perfect. I will say though, the tone in which this book is written is kind of like snarky and quirky, and I feel like it's not for everyone, and it took me a while to get into, but once I got into it, I got really invested. And we do have some romance in here, which is a pretty big part of the story, and I enjoyed it, but like the main thing that I enjoyed was the autumnal vibe and the witchy vibes and this like tournament part. The second one says, show me a book that has a haunted house and a heroine that solves the mystery. I feel like I have a really good book for this, but it's like not quite what this person asked for because it is a haunted boarding school, but like the people live there, so it's kind of like a house. And it's, I don't know if I would call the main character a heroine, but she does solve a mystery. The book that I'm thinking of is one I actually almost just finished. This is The Broken Girls by Simone St. James. And this is a mystery novel, but it also has this haunted boarding school, and it does have like supernatural elements in it. At least the way I interpreted this story. It's set in Vermont, and it has two timelines. One is set in the 1950s and one is set in 2014. And in 2014 we're following a journalist who's looking into these mysteries. One of them is the death of her sister, and in the 1950s perspective we follow some of the girls who go to this boarding school. And the boarding school is like where they send girls that like nobody wants, or they're troublemakers or too smart for their own good. Like, it's that kind of school, and the school is horrible, and it is very, very haunted. This was a really good read though, and it's actually perfect to read in November. I read it in October, which is fine, but like it is set, a lot of it is set in November, in that time between autumn and winter, and it's very atmospheric, gothic, and honestly more spooky than I thought it was going to be. The next two are sort of asking for the same thing, so I'm just gonna put them together. The first one says, show me a book that feels like a warm hug in gloomy weather. By the way, I love your content. Thank you very much. And the other one says, show me a book that gives you a big warm hug. I have the perfect book for this. I'm sure for those of you who spend a lot of time on this channel, this isn't gonna be a surprise to you, but Garlic and the Vampire by Bree Paulsen is the perfect book if you just want something that feels like a warm hug and that is like gonna cheer you up. I love this book. I think it's so, so sweet. And I remember when I read it the first time, I was a little sick and I was feeling like I was having a bad day, and this just cheered me up. It's also the perfect book for autumn because the color palette is like super autumnal. And there is a vampire in this book as well, which is kind of like spooky, although the vampire isn't particularly spooky. It's just like, he's just there and they sort of get to know him. But this is just the sweetest book. And if you like this, you can also read the sequel, which is Garlic and the Witch. And I mean, these books are just like perfect if you want something that feels like a hug. The next one says, show me a book that feels cozy and dark at the same time. Now, I am going to show you a book, but I will mention that I've actually made a whole video about dark and cozy books. I made it a couple of weeks ago now, I think. And if you want like more recommendations than the one I have in this video, check it out because I have loads of books in that video. My main go-to for this kind of book recommendation though is Emily Wilde's Encyclopaedia of Faeries by Heather Fawcett. This is like historical fiction fantasy, and it follows this scholar who goes on a research trip to study fae and fairies because she's working on an encyclopedia. And she goes there and she rubs everyone in the village the wrong way, and it's not great, but then her friend slash rival joins her and everybody loves him and they sort of work together, although this guy doesn't work at all. He just wants to be cozy all of the time, which I can relate to. This book feels really magical though, and it's definitely like a cozy fantasy book. But one of the reasons that I loved it so much is because it has darker elements to it. And some things are like, they're not scary, but they're a little scary. And like the stuff with the fae in here is really interesting because they're sort of, I don't know, they're not that nice necessarily. They're very interesting creatures, but this is a really good one if you want a dark and cozy book. And the sequel is already out, and the third book is coming out, I think, early next year. So if you like this one, there's more to read. The next ones I'm also going to combine, even though they don't have anything to do with one another. The first one says, show me a book that has orange on the cover, and the second one says, show me a book that has some forest animal on the cover. And I have one book to fill both of these. You can't really find a more orange book than this one, or a more autumnal cover, I feel. But this is obviously very orange, and it has a fox and some sort of bird on the cover, and it fills out the forest animal thing as well, although I guess there are foxes in cities as well. Whatever. Usually they live in the forest, but this is a beautiful, beautiful cover, and I actually have all of the seasons for this. Like, they come in all 4 seasons. And they are gorgeous. It's also a really nice book to read actually because you can read poems, like a couple of poems every day during autumn, and it's very cozy. Not all of the poems are for everyone, but I really enjoyed reading this and I love having it on my shelf because it's beautiful. I am actually also going to show you the other ones just because I know a lot of you appreciate book covers the same as me. This one is a poem for every summer day. Very beautiful. This one is a poem for every spring day. Gorgeous. And then a poem for every winter day. This also has a forest animal on the cover. And yeah, these are just gorgeous. The next one I got is a really good one, and I immediately knew which book I was going to pick for this. It says, show me a book that you would like to be inside to experience the vibes for yourself. I would like to visit the coffee shop in Legends and Lattes by Travis Baldree. And it's funny that I'm picking this one because I don't like coffee. I don't drink coffee because it's just, I don't know. I wish I loved it because I feel like it would fit me very well, but I just don't like the taste. Anyways, the reason that I want to go to this place is because, let me find him. There is a little ratkin baker in this book, which if you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. I don't know if you can actually see the illustration of this little guy, but he makes cinnamon buns and he bakes, and I would like to eat his baked goods, and I would also like to meet him. He's very sweet. He's also a little stressed in the kitchen, so maybe I could help him out, you know, but I feel like the vibes in this coffee shop would just be so good. And I could go there and I could read and I could, like, you know, meet the main characters and the ratkin. I think it would be great. Then I have one that I actually struggled with a little bit. I do have a book for this, but I feel like it's not fulfilling it completely. It says, show me a book that features cryptids / folktale. It was also a little bit difficult for me to find a book for this because I don't read that many like scary books, and I often find that like spooky stories with like creatures in it can be a little bit too much for me. But I can recommend this book. This is The Sister Who Ate Her Brothers by Jen Campbell. These are fairy tales slash folk tales that have been reworked by this author, and it has illustrations throughout. There are some ghosts in here, some creatures. Now that I'm thinking of it, do I even know what a cryptid is? I feel like that's like, you know, a Sasquatch. I don't really know. But this has some creatures in it, so this is as close as I'm gonna come. But this is a really, really good book. It's not too scary. It is, I think, meant for like children, but it's really good and it's perfect for spooky season. Then I got another one that I struggled with a little bit as well, because I don't feel like I have something that fits this exactly, but I do have something that fits it for me, so I'm interpreting it in my way. I feel like my answer is a little annoying though, but it says, show me a book that feels like a crisp autumn day. Now, if any of you have any recommendations for this, I'm sure all of us would appreciate if you would put it in the comments, because I think we all want books that feel like a crisp autumn day. But the one that feels like that to me is my favorite book. It's The Secret History by Donna Tartt. And yeah, a part of this is set during autumn, but that's not why it feels like a crisp autumn day to me. The reason is that the first time that I read this book, it was autumn, like full-blown autumn. And since then, I've only ever reread it during autumn. So this is like one of the books that I feel are the most autumnal, even though not all of it is set during autumn. But it does have that like dark academia vibe, which is great. But yeah, I don't know if this fits entirely, but you know, it's all I've got. The next one I got, I actually couldn't think of any for immediately, so I'm gonna have to search my shelves a little bit to answer this one. But it says, show me a book that's originally set in another season, but you think it would be better if it was set in autumn. I think all books would be better if they were set in autumn. Well, not really, but like, we need more autumnal books. But I'm gonna look at my shelves and see if I can find something. Honestly, the thing with this is that a lot of books that are particularly set in a season, usually they really fit that season, and that's like a big part of the story. So I don't know if I would really change anything. So I'm gonna pick this one, even though I don't know if I really mean it. But Sheets by Brenna Thummler. I really like this book. I think the art is great and it has a ghost in it. And the color palette is like pastels and blues and pinks. I think having an autumnal version of this could be cool. I actually don't remember. Well, it is technically set a little bit in autumn, I guess, but yeah. I don't know, this is the only thing I can think of, really. Can't remember, I think it's set in several seasons, but this in like an autumnal color palette, I would love. But I do also love the way that it is. Also, now that I think of it, it's probably a good thing that not all books are set in autumn, because I'm the kind of person who really likes reading books in the season that they're set in, and I already have so many books set in autumn that I feel like I really need to read during autumn, and I can never get to all of them. So maybe actually it's good that we're spreading it out a little bit. The next one says, show me a book that inspires me to bake pies. I don't know if it's that inspiring, but I do have a fun book about baking, kind of. I don't think the main character actually bakes any pies in this book, but it might inspire you to bake in general. It's a Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking by T. Kingfisher. This is a fantasy book about this 14-year-old girl who is a witch, and her magic has to do with like baking, and she feels like her magic is really like it's not doing a lot. But then everything sort of turns upside down when there are some people who are like hunting magical people in this town, and they basically go to war, and she ends up like using her baking magic to defend the city. It's a really good book. It's quite whimsical, but I really, really enjoyed this. And yeah, I did want to bake while I was reading this, so maybe it'll do the same for you. Moving on, we have another two that go together. The first one says, show me a book that you take with you on a road trip to see the fall leaves changing colors. And the second one says, show me a book that is perfect for an autumn road trip. Now, to be totally honest, I really struggled with this, and I'm surprised that I got 2 of these because maybe it's normal to like go on autumnal road trips. It sounds nice, but I'm not really, well, I like traveling, but I don't go on a lot of road trips. And for me, road trips and reading, like those two things don't really go together because I can't read in any moving vehicle. Like people who can do that, that's like a superpower. I will throw up. Like I can barely look at my phone when I'm in a car. And I even sometimes get sick on the subway on the way to work because there's something about it, like I just get motion sick. So for me, it's difficult to sort of put these two things together. I do realize that you don't necessarily do the reading in the car, but I don't know. For me, this just doesn't, I don't know. I feel like I've picked a book that doesn't really fit, but I'm gonna try to explain what I mean. But I picked If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. The thing with this is that one, I picked this because I don't have any road trip books. I don't know if I really like them. But I do feel like this is a really good autumnal book, and I think that the autumnal vibes in here are really good. And I think that reading this in an autumnal setting, like maybe reading a little bit outside and like seeing the leaves change, it would really add to the experience of reading this book. And I feel like this is perfect to read, like maybe you've driven all day and you're like in a cabin or something and you're reading this sort of as it's getting dark. Am I making any sense? I feel like I don't really have the perfect recommendation for this, but yeah. I do think this is a really good book to read at any time. If any of you are road trip people though, and you have a good recommendation for this, let us all know. The next one says, show me a book that gives all the pumpkin spice vibes. I have the perfect book for this, but I am cheating a little bit because I haven't actually read it. But I'm going to show you it anyway. I mean, I can't really say anything else than this book. This is The Pumpkin Spice Cafe by Laurie Gilmore. Like I mentioned, I haven't read this book, so I can't say that I recommend it because I don't know what I think of it. But, like, it's perfect for this prompt, I think. I don't know what kind of spice you mean that you want, if it's just the pumpkin spice or spice, but I've heard that this book is quite spicy, so I'm intrigued. That can go sort of both ways for me. Sometimes I enjoy it and sometimes I really, really dislike it because it just is really cringy. But I've had several of you reach out to me and say like, there's a lot of spice in this book. And the second book is called something like The Cinnamon Bun something, and that one is even spicier. So, I mean, hopefully I like this. I hope that it's going to be a good time and that we'll have some autumnal vibes. The next one I really like because I really like this movie as well. It says, show me a book that feels like Crimson Peak. This one is quite difficult because Crimson Peak has a very particular vibe to it. And I don't think I've ever read a book that is really like it because it's very gothic and it's about taboos and love, sort of, and it's kind of messed up and there's like supernatural stuff. It's very difficult to find something that is exactly like that. But if you haven't read The Fall of the House of Usher by Edgar Allan Poe, I am pretty sure that Crimson Peak is in part inspired by that story. I read it ages ago, so to be honest, I can only remember the vibe of it. I can't remember any of like anything that happens in that story. I need to reread it, but it is a really good story, at least what I can remember. I loved it when I read it, and it has some of the same vibes, and yeah, I am pretty sure it inspired Crimson Peak, so there must be like something in it that feels like that. I don't remember when I first saw Crimson Peak, but I think maybe it was sort of at the same time that I read this. I was really into like gothic, dark things at the time, but yeah. I really recommend Edgar Allan Poe. He's great. Then we have a really good one, and I feel like I have the perfect book for it. It says, show me a book that gives supernatural fall vibes without being witchy or scary. I think We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson is the perfect one for this because this is a sort of like ghostly story without actually having ghosts in it, and it's like a little spooky, but it's not scary really, but it has a lot of like dark gothic vibes. I don't remember if this is set in fall, but you can imagine it being set in fall because it has a lot of those kinds of vibes, and the story's really good. It's about this sort of mystery around these people who have been murdered, and the people who are left in the family have been sort of accused of doing it, and they're shunned in the town and everyone avoids them, but they also kind of don't leave the house. It's a whole thing, but it's a really, really good book, and it's perfect if you want something sort of like autumnal and supernatural-ish without actually the story being supernatural. Then someone writes, show me a book that is funny but also suspenseful and makes you think. I think whether or not this book makes you think is dependent on what kind of reader you are, but this is funny and suspenseful. It's Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. This is one of my favorite books. I loved this book, and the thing about recommending funny books is that not everyone thinks the same things are funny. So it depends on your humor, but like this is my kind of humor exactly. It's a fantasy story about this woman who lives in a convent, and she is a princess, but she spent her whole life in this convent, and both of her sisters have been married off actually to the same man. First, the first sister married him, then she died, and then he came back and got the second sister, and it seems like something's a little bit off about him. So this sister who's in the convent decides that she's gonna go save her sister from this horrible guy, and she goes on a little bit of an adventure, and there is a grave witch who has a pet that is a demon, like in a chicken, so it's a chicken possessed by a demon. That's the level of humor in here, like that's the vibe, and she goes, like she walks around with it, with the chicken on her staff. It's so funny to me. And like there are like it's so hard to explain. There are funny things in this book, and yeah, it's not like ha funny, it's more like chuckle funny, and like some of the characters and stuff, like it's humorous. I don't know if I really know how to explain funny books, but this is a really, really good read, and it is suspenseful because they do go on this sort of quest, and will they survive? Will they make it? Who knows? You gotta read the book to find out. The next one, I'm sure some of you can guess what I'm gonna recommend for this. It says, a scary book that is hard to put down and wants me to sleep with the lights on. I can recommend a book that I read last year that really freaked me out. It is, of course, The Silent Companions by Laura Purcell. This is a historical fiction novel about this woman who just got married, and then 3 weeks into her marriage, her husband dies. And she's sort of married up, so he's like a lot wealthier than she is. And she's left flailing, and like, what is she gonna do? And she is sent to his estate, which is like in the middle of nowhere, and it's next to this little village, and all of the village people, like, they won't go near this house, and the servants are really weird, and it's like the vibe is just off. But she goes there, and one day, like, she finds these like wooden companions in the attic, and they are like creepy, but they're like, okay, we don't know what this is. But then after they find them, they start popping up everywhere in the house. And this part of the story gets like really, really scary. Now, as you might know, I don't deal with too scary books that well. This is as much of like scary things that I can deal with. And I remember when I was like halfway through this book, I was like, I really gotta make sure that I don't finish this at night because I think it's gonna get really bad. But then I kept reading, and it was night, and it started getting really scary, and I just had to finish it because I couldn't not finish it because I needed it to be over. But it was very exciting, very spooky, freaky, freaked me out. And to be honest, when I went to bed that night, I was a little bit spooked. I say a little bit spooked. I was scared, alright? I'm a scaredy cat. Can't help it. The next one that I have, I could also recommend The Silent Companions for. It says, show me a book that gives you goosebumps. If you want goosebumps, that's a really good book, but I'm actually going to show you something completely different to sort of mix it up a little bit. This book, I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Harpman, is one of my favorite books that I read this year, and I know that this isn't for everyone, but I loved this book, and I still think about it all of the time, and just thinking about it gives me goosebumps. But it's one of those things where like it gives me goosebumps because I just thought it was really brilliant, if you know what I mean. It's not because it's scary or anything, although I guess technically it is a little bit scary. It's about these women who live in a cage in a bunker. There's 40 of them, and they don't know what they're doing there. They can't really remember that much from the time before. They don't know how they got there. And the main character that we're following is the youngest of these 40 women. And so she grows up in this cage. She doesn't remember anything outside of it. And they're being like watched over by male guards, and they are there 24/7, but they never talk to them. And then one day something happens, and I mean, this happens pretty early on, but they get out of the cage, and the story is all about what happens after that. It is the kind of book that if you want a lot of answers, this might not be it, because you don't really necessarily get all of the answers. But I just really liked it. I think the main character is very interesting. She's very particular, and this whole setup is just like, even just talking about it gives me goosebumps. It's so good. Then we have a little bit of a cozier request. It says, show me a book you could read in a cozy cafe while sipping a hot cup of coffee. I feel like I have a really cozy book to show you for this. This depends a little bit on what you want, of course, but I can imagine reading The House Witch in a coffee shop and just drinking coffee and having like a really cozy time. This is a fantasy novel about a house witch who starts working for the royal family in this like magical land, and it's very cozy. It has really cozy characters, although the main character is a little bit unlikable at first, and there are some cute sort of creatures in it. I can imagine this being a really good like coffee shop book. It's also not that hard to read, so if you need, like, you don't need to concentrate that hard, because if there's noise around you, I feel like you could still concentrate on this because it's not too complicated. Okay, we're nearing the end now. We're gonna do 2 more. Second to last, someone writes, your favorite book about death. Could be fiction or non-fiction. I have a lot of books about death that I love. I have made a whole video about death books, actually, which is like very niche, but well, death is not that niche, actually, but maybe reading about it is a little bit niche. Whatever. Let me show you my favorite. I do have a lot of books about death that I've loved, but I think maybe my favorite is From Here to Eternity by Caitlin Doughty. One of the reasons that I loved this so much is that it is one of the first books that I read about death, and it blew my mind. I didn't know any of this, but this is basically a book about death rituals around the world, and I guess I kind of knew when I read this book, but it came as a surprise to me how different things are, and like different people relate to death in completely different ways, and it's so different, like from different cultures, and it's very, very interesting. This does also have some illustrations throughout the book, and I really like Caitlin Doughty as a writer. She is a mortician, and she writes in kind of like a humorous way, but she's always very, very respectful, and her books are very easy to read. And yeah, there are some graphic things in here, but I mean, not too graphic, but I really learned a lot from this, and there are so many different ways of sort of taking care of the dead and mourning, and it's very, very interesting. Then we're gonna end it on this one. It says your top 3 books for spooky season. And I'm choosing this one at the end because this is the perfect excuse to show you some like autumnal spooky type of books that I haven't shown in this video yet that I would like to recommend. So I'm gonna go find them. This first one is a book that I mention all of the time. It's the perfect book for spooky season. It's Through the Woods by Emily Carroll. This is a graphic novel filled with 6 spooky stories. It's really, really good. I can also recommend The Strings of Murder by Oscar de Muriel. This follows 2 detectives who are trying to solve this occult case in Edinburgh in the 1800s, and they're just running around trying to figure this out. It's really good. And then, of course, can't make a video without mentioning this. This and The Secret History pops up a lot on this channel. Ninth House by Leigh Bardugo. It is perfect for spooky season, actually, but it's also perfect if you like dark academia, but like really dark, like dark academia. It's one of my favorite books. It's really, really good. Now, those were all the requests that I'm gonna do, but like I mentioned in the beginning, I did get some that I couldn't think of any books for, but that I would also like recommendations for. The first one says, show me a book that feels like drinking mead in a tavern. I would be really interested in recommendations for this, and if you can think of a book that fits this that isn't high fantasy, I would really like to know. Although if you have high fantasy recommendations as well, share them. The second one says, show me a book that has autumnal recipes in it, like cookies, stews, special hot chocolate. I couldn't think of anything for this, and I looked through my recipe books and nothing really fit. So if anyone has any recipe books or any other kinds of books that fit, let us all know. And then the last one is maybe the one that I really want recommendations for. It says, show me a book that feels like walking in a misty forest. I feel like I should have recommendations for this, but like I couldn't really think of anything that fit perfectly. So if any of you have any recommendations for that, let us all know. I would love to read loads of books that feel like walking in a misty forest. I bet someone's gonna recommend me Rebecca for this. Guys, I'm gonna read it one day, I promise. I don't actually know if that fits this prompt, but every time around autumn, Rebecca pops up and someone is like, you gonna read that book? One day I will, I promise. Okay, that was kind of it for today though. I hope you enjoyed this, even though it was a little bit different. And yeah, share all of your book recommendations in the comments as well. I really like these kinds of videos because the comment section, like, it's always so good. And I just love getting book recommendations from you as well. And then everyone can get book recommendations. So share any books that you can think of that fit these prompts. We would all love to know. I'm just rambling now, so we're gonna end it here. Thank you, as always, very much for hanging out with me today, and I will see you soon. Bye!